Master has been cooking for us sometimes, bringing us over goodies and visiting Mike and staying with him at times when I took a brief trip up to Owen Sound. And Terry McCullum, our upstairs neighbor, has always been good to us. And Father Tim, of course, is the person who gave him the last rites last week, the week before last. So thanks very much to him. I'd like to thank all who came and sent cards and phone calls and comforted me in my time of pain and suffering. And I'm making a donation in Michael's name to Loft Community Services, which I find is a very good, helpful organization. It just so happens Terry is the chief executive officer of the organizations. How many people do you have in care amongst all the different, two or three?
We reach about 4,000 a year, and we have more active service for about 2,000.
Yeah. So they really do a great job in Toronto and even York.
York region, yeah.
Well, again, thank you for coming, and are there others who would like to say hopefully kind words about Michael?
Sure, I'll say something.
All right.
I only have a 2-hour speech. I didn't follow Rick's advice. Well, I met Michael back in the late 70s with a church organization called Dignity. And there's a whole bunch of Dignity people here today, including Tim Ryan, wherever he ended up. Oh, well, back there. Tim and Barry and Paul and Don, everybody, you know, was associated with Dignity. Michael got on to me, and Francis back there, and Michael sort of suspected, because I knew the answers to the liturgy better than most, he was kind of wondering what's this all about, so anyway, we became great friends for years. In the early days when you're younger, we'd go out to the bars and have drinks and carry on. As we got a little older, there was more coffee shops, although Sneaky D's was his favorite, as you know. And Michael could talk to anybody, as you know. That was one of his great gifts. And what was really unique about Michael, you know, he just had that way with people. Didn't matter who they were. And Michael was right there with them and could listen and be part of their lives. His best job probably wasn't his last, that's for sure. His best job was probably when he was in Montreal, and he was head of the union when he worked for the city there. And he did some remarkable things. He didn't have that union management conflict. Michael was able to really work a lot of things out. He never got back into that, but he kept that spirit. And even when he was at the post office, which he didn't care for that much, he did get involved in some worker issues with management and was able to help resolve some things outside of all those other structures. So he always kept that keen eye for right things happening and keen eye for people. Of course, he had a gay supervisor called Arthur who was a bit of a drunk, and he worked with this other guy, John, and Arthur would come in and say, well, how are you queens tonight? And Michael had lovely stories from the post office. We won't go into all of it, you know? I can't say everything here. His most colorful job was when he worked a stint at the Selby Hotel. And in those days, the Selby Hotel had a big active bar on the lower level, and then the hotel was kind of shady. It would have a lot of the working girls, so to speak, in there, in and out. And Michael's job was the night guy, so he had to make sure there was order in the place. And he was just by himself, and he had pimps and hookers, and he had everything going on. And there was Michael in his office with his little book. And of course, it was interesting. One time, his parents came to Toronto, and they were walking with him on the street, going to his place on Jarvis, and all these hookers are going, hi, Michael, hi, Michael. Which his father, who was a very sharp guy, just kind of threw him off. He didn't know how quite to take this. Maybe he had questions about Michael or something. As Bill mentioned, his great friend Dale is here, who played piano, and we always had great times together, whether we visited Dale in Montreal or whether down here. And he got a particular kick out of sending Dale. Dale's a concert pianist. And he got a particular kick out of sending Dale flowers once in a while when he was doing his international stuff. One time in Carnegie Hall, I remember, and that really surprised Dale. Another time we tracked down a concert he was doing in England, of all things, and really freaked him out when someone brought flowers up to him from us in Toronto. Mm-hmm. But Michael, you know, that was Michael. He loved that kind of stuff. In the early days, his bar was Buddy's, and we'd all carry on in there. In his latter days, it was Sneaky's. And then he loved the neighborhood bar. Michael was a neighborhood person. He loved to be able to walk up the street and go to his bar, sit there. And as you know, at Sneaky's, everyone would talk to him, everyone knew him. Sneaky's became his family, his other family. And I just, it was an amazing story of how he was welcomed in as almost a family member, you could say, and then he just lived his life that way. And, but that's because of how Michael is, too. That he would be the kind of person you'd want to welcome in. He was so wonderful. And he would tell stories over the years about his parents, who were very interesting people, and he had great admiration for. And his grandfather, who sounds like a real character, and he'd tell stories about his grandfather.
Both grandfathers.
Both. So there were always stories. In latter years, he would talk about Bill's Uncle Jack, and that extension of the family, who are some people here today from that area. He was Catholic, and hence dignity, but he wasn't a churchgoer as such, but he had a deep faith. And I took him to Metropolitan Community Church in the last year or so, and he liked that. But you know, but it was a little too emotional for him, you know, because they have a little slight evangelical streak. And he'd say, "Terry, that's really not us. We're not emotional." There was a tall, red-haired guy that was quite handsome, but he was like, "Oh." And Michael was always dreading that if he went to communion, he'd have him doing the communion. He'd be like, "Oh." He was his faith and his deep faith came out at the end as Tim came, as Bill mentioned, to give him the last sacraments, and that really meant so much to him. And even one of his close friends, Paul Murphy, was reciting Catholic prayers with him towards the end, which is, you know, it's some things just, you know, they're part of you, and they are part of you, and they're on a deep part of you, and it happens. And his other great friend here too, Francis, I see smiling in the back, is here too. And there was one Christmas when we were young, we did crazy things like everyone, and Michael had a one-bedroom apartment on Jarvis, as you probably know. Well, I came home from school one Christmas, and there were 4 of us in that apartment, one-bedroom apartment. It was crazy, the things you do when you're young. But we had fun. And there are many, many, many stories. I won't get into them. Some of them are quite, but we've all experienced Michael in some way, and we know how charming he is, and he was, and how he could reach out to people. And then he met Bill.